on board to cry "Victory!" Somehow, less than an hour later than we should have started, we got off in two big boats with white sails and brown rowers. The canvas did its work in silent, bulging dignity, but the rowers exhausted themselves by breathlessly imploring Allah to grant them strength, and shouting extra prayers to some sailor saint whose name was calculated to pump dry the strongest lungs. On the mystic western side, where once landed with pomp and pageant the sun-boat of the gods, and the mourning boats of the dead, we scrambled on shore with a ribald mirth which always made the Set feel it was getting its money's worth of enjoyment. Many donkeys and a few carriages awaited us, the whole equipment previously engaged for tomorrow, and in opaline sunshine which stained with pale rose the Theban hills and piled the shadows full of dark, dulled rubies, we started across an emerald plain, kept ever verdant by Nile water. The touch of comedy in the dream of beauty was the queer, mud-brick village of Kurna, with its tomb dwellings of the poor, and immense mud vases shaped like mushrooms, standing straight up on thick brown stems before the crowded hovels. In each vase reposed sleeping babies, brooding hens, dogs, rabbits, or any other livestock, mixed with such rubbish as the family possessed, and the most ambitious mushrooms were decorated with barbaric crenellations. Almost as far as the temple of Seti I flowed the green wave like a lake in the desert, but beyond, to join the Sahara, rolled and billowed a waste of pink-rose sand, shot with topaz light, and walled with fantastic rocks, yellow and crimson, streaked with purple. In the heart of each shadow, fire burned like dying coals in a mass of rosy ashes, and the light over all was luminous as light on southern seas at moonrise and sunset. Before our eyes seemed to float a diaphanous veil of gilded gauze, and white robes and red sashes of donkey boys, animals' bead necklaces, and blue or green scarves on girls' hats, were like magical flowers blowing over the gold of the desert. Everything blue, above all sand blue. We found that to our sorrow, after we had seen the temple of Kurna, with its noble columns, and its fine fragment of roof, where squares of sky were let in like blocks of lapis lazuli. I rushed here and there on donkey back, assuring people that this was not wind we felt, it was only a breeze. We could not have had a more favourable day for our excursion into this world of the dead. Why, if we'd waited till tomorrow we might have met a real wind, perhaps even Khamsin, alias Simoon, the terror of the desert. To make Miss Hassett Bean and Cleopatra forget the smarting of their eyes, I told them what a true sandstorm was like, and how its names in Arabic, Turkish, and Persian all come from the fiend Samiel, who destroyed caravans, just as devil came from the Persian div. Our little breeze was from the east, which at Thebes in old days was considered lucky. The west wind used to bear across the river evil spirits disguised as sand clouds, and these wicked ones had not far to travel, because the Tuat, or underworld, was a long narrow valley parallel to Egypt, beginning on the west bank of the Nile. Red-haired Set was ruler there, the god who had to be propitiated by having kings named after him. But Ra, greater than he, could safely pass down the dim river running through that world, could pass in his golden sun-boat, guided by magic words of Thoth instead of oars or sails, and the guardian hippopotamuses, whom Greeks turned into the dog Cerberus, dared not put out a paw. Mrs. East remembered that Thebes was tape in her day, at which Miss Hassett Bean snorted, and when out came that familiar story about Cleopatra making red hair fashionable, Miss Hassett Bean stared coldly at the lady's auburn waves. "I wonder if the Queen got the colour at her hairdresser's, as people do now," she murmured. "I've read that they had beauty doctors in those days, and used arsenic for their complexion, and all sorts of mixtures. Besides, I can't imagine anything natural about Cleopatra, except the asp wanting to bite her." Upon this, Mrs. East retaliated by calling her companion Miss Bean without the Hassett. I shall always think of the Valley of the Tombs as a place of terror and splendour, meant to be hidden from mortals by the spells of Thoth, who circled the rock houses of the dead with a zone of fire, as Wotan hid Brunhilde, and decreed that they should be lost forever in the blazing desert. Despite Thoth and his magic, men have burst through the blazing belt and found in the gold rose heart of the rocks sacred shrines the wise old god would have protected. They have found many, but not all, for in the breast of some one among Thoth's sleeping lions, which masquerade as rocks, may yet be discovered a tomb, better than all those we know, with their buried store of jewels, and their painted walls like drapings of strange tapestry. We broke through the zone of fire, and it pursued us with burning smoke of sand, pink as powdered rubies. Always it was beautiful and terrible as we rode in the blowing pink mist, and still it was beautiful and terrible when half dazed we slipped off donkeys or slid out of carriages to enter the tombs which the desert had vainly striven to hide. It was hot and breathless in those underground chambers, scooped out of solid rock thousands of years ago, that great kings and their queens and families and friends might rest with their cause in eternal privacy. Enid Biddle waited until Harry Snell happened to be exactly behind her, and then fainted, with dexterity beyond praise. Cleopatra, however, was in her element. She felt at home, and did not turn one of those auburn hairs scorned by Miss Bean at a sight of the royal mummies lit up by electricity in their coffins. These gave the rest of us a shock, our nerves being already in the condition of Aladdin's on his way down to the Cave of Jewels. When the guardian of the tomb of Amenhotep, the king had several other names, which annoyed Sir John Biddle, darkened the painted royal chamber of death, and suddenly lit up several white, sleeping faces, the ghostly dusk was alive with little gasps. There lay Amenhotep himself, in a disproportionately large sarcophagus of rose-red granite from Suan, and in companion coffins were a woman and a girl, all three brilliantly illuminated. They had the look of the light hurting their poor eyes, and being outraged because, against their will, they were treated as if they had been painted by old masters. The dreadful rumour ran that the woman was none other than the great Queen Hatasu, never mind her more scientific names, her mummy never having been found, or at any rate identified, and it was pitiful seeing her so small and female, when in life she had wished to be represented with a beard and the clothing of a man. Our dragoman, who read English newspapers, and whose idea of entertaining his crowd was to make cheap jokes, just as his family doubtless manufactured cheap scarabs, announced that Hatasu was the first suffragette. But even those who thought her downtrodden nephew, Tutmosis III, justified in erasing every trace of her existence wherever possible, did not smile at this jest. In fact, having Antoun and me to refer to, the set as a whole sat upon the unfortunate dragoman, trying to talk him down in tombs and temples, or ostentatiously reading Weigall, Maspero, Petrie, Sladen, and Lorimer when he attempted to give them information. A few with kinder intentions, however, interrupted his flow of historical narrative by exclaiming, "Why, yes, of course, I thought so," and "Now I remember." He revenged himself by advising everybody to buy antiques from an extraordinarily old gentleman, extremely like a galvanized mummy. The antiques were extraordinary too, so everybody took the dragoman's advice, neglecting the other curiosity merchants of the squatting row near the luncheon tomb and the glorious three-tier temple, in that vast copper cup of desert and cliff which is called Deir el Bahari. The sail in mummied hawks, gilded ram's horns, broken tiles with beetles flying out of the sun, boats of the gods, and gods themselves, was brisk round this ancient gentleman, who advertised a blue mummy cap by wearing it on his bald pate, and seemed to possess as many royal scarabs as dressmaker has pins. Afterward I learned that he was our dragoman's father, but I was loyal and did not tell. It was a wonderful day, all the more wonderful, perhaps, because it left in the mind a colourful confusion: pictures of painted tombs hidden deep under red rock and drifted sand, tombs which we should perhaps never reach again through their guarding zone of fire, tombs of kings and queens and nobles forgotten through the thousands of centuries, save by their Kas and Bas, their friends and servants, painted or sculptured on the walls with the sole purpose of caring for or entertaining them eternally. Already we had ceased to remember which was which; and back on the boat, in the hour of sunset, when dazzling tinsel and pale pink cloud flowers sailed over a lake of clear green sky, the set argued whether the king with the Horuses or the queen with the retroussé nose was in this or that tomb. Sir John Biddle recalled the fact that Egyptian horses had been celebrated, and that it was as swell a thing to be a charioteer then as it was now to be a Vanderbilt with a coach and four. As for a retroussé nose, it didn't matter where it was, on a tomb wall or a girl's face. Monny thought differently. She and Biddy were glad that the sand and rocks would still hide many secret treasures, while the world lasted. It would be dreadful to think that everything was dug up, for tourists to pry into or to cart away into museums, and no mysteries left. As for Mrs. East, she was doubtful whether to rejoice or grieve that Cleopatra's mummy had not been found. If, however, it were like the incised portrait on the wall at Denderah, it would be well that it should share the fate